We now come to the second Opposition Day motion on British Indian Ocean territory. The Speaker has not selected the amendment. Dame Priti Patel to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the motion that stands in my name and the name of my right honourable friend, the Leader of His Majesty's Opposition, and other honourable and right honourable members. Madam Deputy Speaker, when Labour negotiates, Britain loses. And nowhere is this more obvious than in Labour's botched, embarrassing, humiliating and secretive deal with Mauritius to surrender the sovereignty of the British Indian Ocean Territory. In a world that has become increasingly dangerous and uncertain, when threats from both state and non-state actors are growing, when our national economic and security interests face threats from new technology, it is inconceivable that a government whose first concern and priority has to be the defence of the realm would give away one of the most important strategic military assets that we hold, let alone then pay a foreign government for its continued use. Madam Deputy Speaker, let's be clear about this. This is like handing over your house to someone else and then having to pay the privilege of continuing to live there. Now, I know, not just yet, I will in a moment. I know this socialist government are committed to the principles of redistributing wealth. They're even cheering about this on the benches opposite. But redistributing the sovereignty of key strategic and military assets in this way is not just socialism, it's recklessness, it's incompetent, and quite frankly, it is irresponsible. We cannot simply afford to gamble in any way when it comes to our national security and defence. I will give way.
I thank her very much for giving way. I'm just a little bit confused, and it'd be good to settle this at this start. I think the honourable members should be... If the Conservative Party wants to take Tonbridge Wells back at the next election, they would do well to listen to this member. The clarity that I would like... The clarity that I would like from the Shadow Foreign Secretary is why is she criticising a deal, the negotiations for which were started by the Conservative Party?
Well, look, I can't speak about the point that he's being confused at all, but let's just be very clear about this. Let's just be very clear about this. It's not a Conservative Party that's putting forward a surrender deal. So let me just be absolutely crystal clear about that. We're not surrendering territory or our sovereignty in any way whatsoever. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, while the Labour government, inspired by their dogmatic commitment to misguided... I will give way, of course, I will give way.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend. Can I help the confused member of the Liberal Democrats? I was in the Foreign Office during the whole of the Tory negotiations, so I witnessed exactly what my right honourable friend from Braintree and the noble Lord Cameron did in these negotiations. I can tell her, the House and the Liberal Democrats that the deal that has been done by the Labour Party is one which Tory ministers would never have countenanced.
Well, look, my right honourable friend is actually bringing me fast forward to some of my wider remarks, but he's absolutely right, and I do want to thank him for his time in the Foreign Office, because it was actually under Lord Cameron when all of this was stopped. But there are some other points to make. Actually, this is an advisory opinion, and we also know that in 2019 it was a Conservative government and Conservative foreign ministers that made that point and basically stopped all this nonsense from going on in the first place. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this side of the House stands in support of the national interest, and I pay tribute to actually my colleagues, my previous colleagues and previous Conservative governments for resisting the efforts of some countries at the UN General Assembly, including China and Argentina, who voted in May 2019 to demand that the UK withdraw from its administration of the Chagos Archipelago within 6 months. And it was the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, who does deserve credit for resisting these claims made by Mauritius and for ensuring that our sovereignty was not surrendered when he was Foreign Secretary. So how have we got here, Madam Deputy Speaker? As Madam Deputy Speaker will know from the sheer volume of urgent question applications that she and Mr Speaker have presided over on this particular issue, this government has acted in a secretive manner, providing little information on the deal that has been agreed and how it has been reached. Getting facts and information out of this government has been like extracting water from a stone. But after asking many questions, we have managed to secure some information. So what do we know? Well, I can tell you, and the front bench that are chuntering away, or perhaps they'd like to listen to some of the information. What we do know is that in less than 3 weeks after taking office, on the 23rd of July, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary prioritised this issue by meeting with the former Prime Minister of Mauritius, Pravin Jugnauth, who, and what was discussed at that meeting, we do not know. But on the 10th of September, the Foreign Secretary announced that Jonathan Powell had been announced as the Special Envoy. And on the 3rd of October, less than 3 months after coming into office, and when the House was not sitting, the Foreign Secretary confirmed that he had waved the white flag of surrender. He confirmed that this Labour government would hand over the sovereignty of the British Indian Ocean Territory, pay a lease for the use of the base at Diego Garcia. The amount has been kept secret and paid towards funding an economic development partnership with Mauritius and a Chagossian trust fund. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, not only was this deal put together in haste and in secret, serious concerns were raised about the timing of this agreement. The then Mauritius Prime Minister called a general election on the following day, the 4th of October 2024. And, of course, the presidential election of our ally and partner in Diego Garcia, the United States of America, was held the following month. The result of both of these elections led to changes in administration, which I'll touch on shortly. And the decision over the future of this key strategic military and security asset has been taken in advance of the Strategic Defence Review being completed, the spending review and the China audit. So how can the government justify giving away the Chagos Island, losing control of this asset before it has thoroughly assessed the threats we face and our long-term defence and security needs? Madam Deputy Speaker, unlike lawyer-led Labour, this side of the House believes that decisions over the future of key strategic, unqualified, if I may just caveat my remarks, unqualified, pretend lawyers, not even actual lawyers. This side of the House believes that decisions over the future of key strategic military assets cannot be taken on advisory opinions issued and by motions agreed in international organisations, especially when the votes have been cast against us by nations and indeed judges who may pose a threat to us and have their own interests. Britain is a global power and we face global threats, and the base of Diego Garcia is one of the most important strategic and military assets in the Indo-Pacific for us and for our US partners. If our sovereignty over the base and the Chagos Islands is lost or diluted or compromised, we are weaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, and our rivals and competitors and enemies grow stronger. I will give way.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Would she agree that if you are led by lawyers, and there's nothing wrong with that, you should at least get the law right? So if there is legal jeopardy here, does she agree that we should understand what that jeopardy actually is? She knows that the International Court of Justice cannot make a binding ruling against the UK in this matter because Mauritius is a member of the Commonwealth. We've not accepted their jurisdiction in those circumstances. So is this a good moment for the Minister to explain to us, if there is legal jeopardy that makes a deal necessary, precisely what that legal jeopardy is?
Well, my right honourable and learned friend absolutely speaks sense on this issue, and this is exactly why I enjoyed working with him so much on some of the challenges we face in government. And that is exactly the point. It really is. Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to the substance or proposed substance and the proposed treaty, well, while this Labour government have failed to provide any transparency over plans, we're fortunate that the new Prime Minister of Mauritius, Navin Ramgoolen, and his government have been much more open and candid about the negotiations, sharing the details of the humiliating concessions Labour ministers have made in this epic failure of diplomacy. First, we will... Yes, I will give way.
Well, I just wanted to prompt her to pursue one other matter, which is quite important. I was looking at the list of the judges who sat on this ICJ panel. And it's quite interesting that, apart from there being a Russian who is fully supportive of the invasion of Ukraine, it also turns out that Vice President Xu, who wrote the whole case, also voted to support the Russian invasion of Ukraine and was heavily involved in the Chinese government prior to her becoming part of this. To what degree do we think that this represents balanced and informed judgment, as we would have in the UK, but here internationally?
My honourable friend is absolutely spot on and makes the point that I've made. There are people, judges in particular, who clearly are undermining our own integrity, sovereignty and actually decision-making in our own government. And they are pursuing their own interests, and that's why we have to call this deal out. I will give way.
Point, did my right honourable friend see the report in the Telegraph on 26th of February that one of the other judges, Patrick Robinson, who took part in that judgment, believes that the United Kingdom should be repaying at least £18 trillion in reparations for slavery in the past?
I did actually read that report and see it, and I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is exactly why we questioned this deal. This is the wrong approach, it really is. And I'm afraid, for all the lawyers that are sitting on the benches opposite and in the government, why are they not effectively looking at the integrity of this proposed deal and supposed lawyers, and actually questioning and providing the scrutiny that is needed? And Madam Deputy Speaker, we do need ministers to confirm when they decided that the proposed deal should be shared with the new American administration, because there are so many questions as to how we've got into this position. For weeks, ministers refused to say, and we've been here in the House at this dispatch box, they refused to say that they would wait until President Trump took office, including failing to answer questions here directly on January the 14th. While they were refusing to say anything, the Mauritius government suggested that ministers here were not just eager, but desperate to complete the deal by the 20th of January. But on the 15th of January, through a Downing Street briefing, not a statement to this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, we learnt that the government would now wait to brief the new president, and that the Prime Minister of Mauritius has told his assembly that it was a unilateral decision of the United Kingdom to postpone matters, and that was taken on the 15th of January. So when the Minister responds to this debate, will the Minister finally confirm on which date the government policy towards consulting the new US administration and delaying the deal was agreed?
Will my right friend give way?
I will give way.
My right friend makes an excellent point. The attitude of the government of the United States is absolutely central to this, and there has been a profound change in the stance taken by the government of the United States with the election of the new president. Now, instead of embracing this and seeing this as an opportunity, the party opposite seem determined to railroad through a deal which does not, it appears, command the support of the government of the United States. It's a preposterous position to be in.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and it is shameful, Madam Deputy Speaker, because these are exactly the questions that we on this side of the House were putting forward to the government, and they were simply refusing to be transparent and answer any questions whatsoever. And the fact of the matter is, the credibility and the integrity of government is at stake. If they cannot come clean on these simple questions, what else are they hiding? I will, of course.
This was compounded even further only yesterday when the statement was handed to the Leader of the Opposition with redacted information. That is absolutely shameful, because the duty of Her Majesty's Opposition is to hold the government to account. How can it do that if it doesn't get the information that it's needed to make the best decisions for this country?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'm afraid this is for the party and government to reflect upon their own conduct. The British public are about to have to fork out absolutely huge amounts of money for a deal that has not had scrutiny, had no public airing whatsoever. The lack of transparency is one thing, but when we see this now being repeated across every government department and even a Prime Minister's statement, that is simply not acceptable. There is something deeply shameful about the conduct and the lack of transparency of this government. Second, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the negotiations, the Mauritius Prime Minister has publicly given a chronology of the counter-proposals his government has put forward to change the agreement reached and announced by his predecessor and the UK Prime Minister. He has stated to his National Assembly that upon taking office in November, he had, guess what, reviewed the deal. The same deal, this is exactly the same deal, that the Foreign Secretary has described as a very good deal, and one he was confident that the Mauritians were still sure about that, really sure about it. And yet the Mauritian Prime Minister concluded that the deal was so bad, we said no way. There's video footage of this as well. It's available to everyone online to see. He claimed that he was subsequently submitted a counter-proposal to the UK and that the UK government responded on 16th of December. Then, on the 31st of December, Mauritius submitted its response and requested a meeting in January, which was quickly arranged and held. That meeting took place. The Mauritius Cabinet then met on the 15th of January, and soon after their delegation, led by their Attorney-General, Gavin Glover, came to London to meet with the Minister and to meet with the Attorney-General, Lord Hermer. Wow. So, according to the Mauritius, there were a series of counter-proposals and responses were exchanged. But when we asked the government about whether counter-proposals were received and what they were, including at questions yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, ministers have continuously refused to say. I find it astonishing, again, that this House has had to rely on Hansard from the Mauritius National Assembly. It's very good. I recommend colleagues read it. We've had to rely on that Hansard to find out what UK government ministers are up to. That's why our motion demands the publication of chronology so we know what has happened. When we hear from the Minister, perhaps she can confirm if this account from the Prime Minister of Mauritius is correct. The Minister should also explain to the House the role that the Attorney-General has been playing in these negotiations, because written answers have stated that his meeting with the Mauritius delegation last month was a courtesy meeting. But the Prime Minister of Mauritius has stated that when his Attorney-General met with his British counterpart, Lord Hermer, and the Under-Secretary of State, the Minister in the Foreign Office, they both assured him of the commitments of the UK government to signing the agreement between Mauritius and the United Kingdom. Giving that assurance seems to demonstrate that the Attorney-General was actively playing a part in the negotiations rather than attending a courtesy meeting. Yep. And in view of this previous interest in the British Indian Overseas Territory, questions will rightly be raised about his involvement. So can the Minister confirm if the Attorney-General has reclused himself on these matters? Third, Madam Deputy Speaker, we know from the account given by the Prime Minister of Mauritius that concessions have been made over sovereignty, even though ministers here have refused to confirm or admit it. The joint statement of the 3rd of October said, for an initial period of 99 years, the United Kingdom will be authorised to exercise, with respect to Diego Garcia, the sovereign rights and authorities of Mauritius required to ensure the continued operation of the base well into the next century. And when we asked yesterday, very question if a change had been made, the Minister has said the fundamentals of the deal remain the same. But if the fundamentals of the deal remain the same, why is it that the Mauritius Prime Minister has said there have been changes? The British agreed. We insisted that the sovereignty issue is the crucial and most important issue. We insisted that it be clear that we have complete sovereignty on the Chagos, including Diego Garcia. The British agreed to that, and this has been changed. And why is it that in a letter sent to me this week by the Foreign Secretary that he does not use the word sovereignty in relation to the lease, only stating that the UK would retain all the rights and authorities we need to ensure the long-term, secure and effective operation of the base. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the difference in the language between the joint statement from October and this letter to me matters. The Minister and the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister may not realise it, but removing sovereignty is a fundamental change and it matters to the defence and the security of our country. I will give way.
Extremely grateful, Honourable Lady. And this point she makes, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not merely semantic, because in international law, which I know holds great sway on the benches opposite, those who interpret our entitlements will look closely at whether we have sovereign power or only power by means of an agreement which be torn up by Mauritius.
My right honourable friend is spot on. He is absolutely correct. Sovereignty matters. And the Minister couldn't admit it to the House yesterday in the Chamber. But perhaps when the Minister sums up today, they could confirm that change in position. We need to know, have we lost sovereignty and lost control? Fourth, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is clear that there has been a change in the lease agreements. It is absolutely crystal clear in this letter. And when the Foreign Secretary gave his statement to the House on the 7th of October 2024, he stated that the lease is initially for 99 years, but the UK has the right to extend that. And the impression given was that this could be unilaterally extended, as he would not say at the time that both parties needed to agree. I will give way.
Point, I beg her indulgence. The reality is that the present Prime Minister publicly stated, when he also, by the way, mentioned that the cost would be up to 18 billion, but apart from that, he did say at the same time, he said, interestingly, we would have happily looked at joint sovereignty where it was clear, but the British government didn't want it.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct, and I'm afraid it shows the lack of commitment to even understanding sovereignty of territory. I will give way.
Is she aware that there is already a campaign led by local celebrities in Mauritius to ensure that once sovereignty is restored to Mauritius, the treaty is reneged on and an attempt is made to close the airport?
Well, my honourable friend is making a really important point, and I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is why, on this side of the House, we will be scrutinising the government even further on this. We will be holding them to account. They simply do not value sovereignty, and they are about to give away control, and that is simply not acceptable. I will give way one more time, yes, of course.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. This issue of sovereignty is totally crucial. First of all, it's not about restoring sovereignty to Mauritius. Mauritius never had sovereignty in the first place. Moreover, the moment at which the United Kingdom government concedes the point of sovereignty, all else is lost in the negotiation. We have not a leg to stand on. So clarity on this point is totally essential.
My friend is absolutely right. And the fact that this government just seems to have a complete disregard, and he's absolutely right that they never had sovereignty at all in the first instance. And now look at the terrible mess. This is a complete surrender, and it is an epic, epic failure when it comes to diplomacy. But we also know, Madam Deputy Speaker, from the Mauritius... shortly, I'll give way. Just let me make a bit more progress. We also know from the Mauritius Prime Minister that the lease extension provisions, guess what, have been changed and diluted. He told his National Assembly that the agreement was for an agreement of 99 years, and then unilaterally the British would decide on the extension of that agreement for 40 years. We had no say in it. We disagreed completely. That it cannot be that an agreement is signed for 99 years and then the British on their own would decide that they will review the agreement and we will have no say on it. He went on to say, and he has got this change, stating, the extension has to be agreed with both parties. It cannot be unilateral from the British. And I'm glad to inform, this is the Mauritius Prime Minister speaking in his National Assembly to the leader of their opposition, that the British have agreed also to do that. And Madam Deputy Speaker, in his letter to me, the Foreign Secretary remarked that the 99-year lease can be extended if both sides agree. We will have the right of first refusal, meaning it can't be given to any other country at the end of the treaty without us first agreeing it. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is quite frankly astonishing in terms of a response to receive and also a concession for the Labour government to make. This deal was bad enough at the outset, but now we know that despite the Minister's claims that the fundamentals of the deal remained the same, we have gone from the UK being able to unilaterally extend the lease by 40 years to only now being able to extend it with the agreement of Mauritius. And there being a right of first refusal caveat in that lease too. The House should be shocked by this, and we need answers. What would happen, and I urge the Minister to answer these questions when the Minister responds, What happens at the end of the 99-year period if both parties cannot agree? What happens if we want to extend and Mauritius does not? What will happen to the base, to the equipment under these circumstances? What if at the end of 99 years the price that Mauritius asks is too high? If we cannot unilaterally extend the lease, then guess what? We've lost control. The Labour government may not realise this, but Mauritius knows this very, very well. The British taxpayer knows this extremely well. And of course, our enemies know this, and they're sitting back and watching, rubbing their hands with glee, because on all the key negotiation points, Labour have backed down and Britain is losing control. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will give way.
I think that my right honourable friend is making an incredibly important point about how the government is giving way, but we only know that because of the way that Mauritius is actually going to the public. Actually, we're the ones who, in this House, have been constantly left in the dark. So much so that even when I was on Politics Live recently with the leader of the House, she refused point blank and totally lost the plot whenever I started to question her about what this government was doing. Isn't transparency absolutely at the core of what we need to hear from this government?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and Madam Deputy Speaker, I've made this point already, and you've heard many of us say this today as well. There is a failure to be transparent, and the fact that I have quoted today so much from the Hansard, from the Mauritius National Assembly, speaks volumes. It really does about the conduct of this government. They've been great reads, I have to say, and the video clips are absolutely astonishing. But I certainly think that this government should learn some lessons in terms of high standards and raising the bar. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. What she's describing is truly shocking. This Labour government is going to give away British sovereign territory. It's going to charge the poor elderly pensioners and our business people in order to do so. And it's going to fundamentally fail in its first duty to keep Britain safe by making our country less safe. What on earth is motivating them to do this dreadful thing?
There are plenty. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's plenty of speculation, if I may say so. Plenty of speculation in terms of why it is the government wishes to go down this course, and it's not in our national interest. And I'm going to say it, the party opposite do not represent the national interests of this country when it comes to sovereignty and fighting for the real freedoms that the British people believe in. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, you've already heard me speak about the terms of the lease. The Labour government has also made concessions on the costs. The price that British taxpayers will be forced to pay because of this shambolic, economically illiterate government. For weeks we've been asking about the costs and any changes made from the position in October, and for weeks ministers have failed to give answers. But the Prime Minister of Mauritius has confirmed that concessions have indeed been made. He has told his National Assembly, we also wanted to do front-loading. Some of the money has to be front-loaded. He said that with a lot of enthusiasm when he made that point. And that also it's been agreed to. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was only after I wrote to the Foreign Secretary to highlight this to him that he has finally accepted that this has happened and changes had been made. Writing in the letter to me, he said that there have been some changes to the financial arrangements to enable a limited element of front-loading, but the overall net present value of the treaty, that's payments which accounts for the impact of indexation, has not changed since. This change was not announced to the House, and nor did the Minister or any minister mention this in this chamber or when I raised this in the House yesterday. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, while we know that the costs will be front-loaded, we still do not know what they will actually be. The Foreign Secretary has written to me in his letter to tell me that the £18 billion figure reported, and I quote, is false and significantly exceeds the quantum. So what is the figure?
What is the figure?
Is it 9 billion?
Yeah.
Is it 12 billion? Is it 15 billion? Is it higher or lower? The Minister only needs a nod to give us some clarity on this. Perhaps the Minister doesn't even know the cost.
Will she give way on that point?
I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Foreign Secretary for giving way. When the Defence Secretary was asked this morning on LBC, where is this funding coming from, he said there will be no payments unless and until the deal is struck. That's not answering
the question, who would go into a deal not knowing how they're going to pay for it? So which budget is it coming from? Is it coming from the FCDO budget? Is it coming from the defence budget? Is it included in the new defence budget spending or not? These are questions that the Prime Minister refused to answer today. Does she have any thoughts of how we can get the answers out?
Friend, for this really, really essential point and question which has remained unanswered. The end of the day, we do need to know. The government must be clear about where this money is coming from which budget. But on the fact that we don't even know the sums, this is taxpayers' money. How can any government justify these extraordinary sums? I will give way.
Thank you. What is agreed universally is that the cost is £9 billion. The government doesn't question that at all. Whether there's front-loading or not, we don't yet know. But assume that it's £90 million a year for 99 years. A lot of people in the media and in politics seem to have a problem with basic arithmetic and compounding. 90 million a year, index linked at 3%, is £52 billion. It is a completely eye-watering sum, and I'm very surprised that the opposition, His Majesty's loyal opposition, are not using that number, or perhaps they're just so embarrassed that they began the negotiations themselves. I don't know.
I think the bottom line to all of this is that there is no transparency from this government at all, and we will absolutely press the government and hold them to account on this. But I come back to the point, no minister, and we've just heard it from the benches opposite behind us as well, that not even the Defence Secretary today could actually tell us where that money was coming from. And perhaps the Minister doesn't know the costs, or perhaps she needs permission from the Attorney-General or Rachel from Accounts to even comment on these numbers. But the House must know, because Labour has sought to hide behind the real reason and what is going on here. And they're constantly using this fig leaf of national security as to why they will not tell British taxpayers about how much this is going to cost. This is simply not acceptable whatsoever. And I do just want to say, if they won't tell us numbers, that they should at least be able to tell us where the budget has come from. In a written parliamentary answer dated on the 22nd of November, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury confirmed to me that he had engaged in discussions and reached an agreement with Cabinet colleagues on the financial elements of the proposed lease of the military base on Diego Garcia as part of the UK-Mauritius agreement announced on the 3rd of October. So, can the Minister confirm whether or not, can intervene now if the Minister would like to, if this is going to come from the defence budget? And if it does, will it count to the new 2.5% target announced by the Prime Minister yesterday? And it will be a stain on this government if they reach that target as a result of wasting this money, hard-pressed taxpayers' money on this unnecessary lease. And we do deserve, the British public do need some accountability and transparency. I will, just one more time, I'm
very grateful to my right honourable friend. She's been very generous. Does she agree with me that the government stands accused of being perhaps guilty of some creative accounting? Because if what it's doing is transferring money from the international development budget to defence and then transferring the self-same money from defence to Mauritius, allowing ministers to benefit from the fiction of an uplift in the defence budget, the public is entitled to smell a rat.
My right friend is absolutely right. This is completely duplicitous, it really is. And this is no way that any government should be conducting itself, particularly on something like this. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, in negotiating this deal and agreeing to surrender... I will, I'm very sorry, I did say that I would.
Forgive me if she's going to come to this point in her final words, but isn't it extraordinary that we should be doing something that so many people in Washington profoundly object to, when the Prime Minister is about to have an extremely delicate discussion with the President of the United States about whether he will reaffirm his security guarantees for the security and peace of our whole continent and indeed for our country. Isn't this some kind gift that the government should take to Washington and saying, we will drop this if you have the slightest objection?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and this is a critical time for our two countries when it comes to our place in the world, but also our standing in the world. And all we've been seeing from this government is an epic failure of diplomacy, making concession after concession. Labour have shown themselves to be weak. Not only have they undermined our strategic defence interests, a very, very close relationship, obviously, with our dear ally. They are putting our territories at risk. They are wasting taxpayers' money. We need a government that stands tall in the world, that will fly the Union flag with pride rather than the white flag of surrender. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this deal is an epic failure in diplomacy, and it's causing our standing in the world to fall. And this House must vote for our motion to defend our national interests and Britain's standing in the world.
The question is as on the order paper. Before I call the Minister, there will have to be an immediate 5-minute time limit on backbench contributions. That obviously excludes the front benches. Anneliese Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for bringing this opposition debate. As she knows, for over 50 years, the UK-US base on Diego Garcia has been a bulwark in the Indo-Pacific, supporting critical missions against terrorists, countering hostile states, and keeping us and the rest of the world safe. This government is committed to protecting our base, protecting our position and capabilities in the Indian Ocean, and protecting national security. The deal that we have negotiated achieves all of these goals. It's rooted in a rational and hard-headed determination to protect our country's security, which is the first duty of any government. And it is this government that is delivering on it and not ducking questions, as she well knows. The status quo is not sustainable. I'll make progress and I'll be very happy to take interventions. The status quo is not sustainable. It imperils UK and US strategic interests. A deal, as she knows, is necessary. This deal will ensure the continued uninterrupted operation of the base on Diego Garcia well into the next century. It will cement UK and US presence in the Indo-Pacific for generations to come. And I haven't heard a single suggestion in her lengthy speech about how she would secure that base at all. Now, base operations, Madam Deputy Speaker, have been under increasing threat for decades. She knows this, and many on her benches also know it. Claims that there were no legal necessities to negotiate are absolutely wrong. They misunderstand the legal jeopardy and immediate operational challenges that the base faces. I'll come on to that. I'm well aware of that. Ever since the legal certainty of the base was called into doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, its ability to operate in practical terms as it should be able to, given it's such a critical facility, has been undermined. I know she's aware of this. Now, the 2019 ICJ advisory opinion may be the most eye-catching of the legal developments in recent years, but it is by... OK, I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
OK. Excellent. I just want to bring the Right Honourable Lady back to her statement that there was an imperative to resolve this. First of all, she knows very well that in the original agreement setting up the ICJ, it's very clear, and has been made clear by ex-Attorney General, that nothing regarding the Commonwealth actually falls within this as a directive. So it is advisory by definition. But this is the question to the Right Honourable Lady. The government also has at the bottom of that agreement a waiver that if they want, therefore, to dismiss that, they can go ahead with it on that basis. Could the Right Honourable Lady accept? Will she answer this question? Has this government issued a waiver on their provision that nothing has to be a directive from this court? Yes. Have they issued a waiver? Yes.
Of course we know about that ICJ carve-out in relation to the Commonwealth. This is common knowledge. I find it slightly strange that he's presenting this as something that the House is not aware of. Very peculiar indeed. And he would have done well to wait for the rest of what I was going to say in relation to legal jeopardy, Madam Deputy Speaker, because this is by no means... No, I will make progress. This is by no means... No, I said I'd make progress.
She said no. No means no.
As the Shadow Minister will know, the Minister is not obliged to take interventions from the dispatch box. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Quite the opposite. I'm going to explain to the opposite benches because I feel they are perhaps unaware of the fact that ICJ advisory opinion is simply the most eye-catching of a huge number of legal concerns around the present situation. And those who had the genuine security of that base at the front of their minds, they would be determined to secure its future. Without a deal, it is inevitable that Mauritius would pursue a legally binding judgment against UK sovereignty. Since 2015, there have been 28 international judges and arbitrators who have expressed views on the sovereignty of the Chagos archipelago. The members opposite are keen to shout, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if they can tell me how many have agreed with the UK position. They're very quiet, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's because not a single one of those arbitrators and judges have expressed support for the UK claim about sovereignty. This lack of legal certainty would have real-world impacts on base operations and would create space for our enemies. Now, some of those impacts would be on simple but crucial things, like securing contractors and getting overflight clearances. And I regret that the opposition said not a single word about that issue of securing contractors and getting overflight clearances. There were other matters they didn't talk about. Very happy to give way.
I'm extremely grateful for her giving way, and she's absolutely entitled to explain what the government's position is. But if her argument is that there is legal uncertainty here, she'd better get used to it, because there's legal uncertainty about a lot of things. If her argument is that lots of people disagree with the UK's position, she'd also better get used to that. As I've understood the government's position, it has thus far been that the advisory opinion we have received may one day become a binding judgment against the UK, obliging the UK government to act as it now seeks to do. My question is simply, I want to know from where may that binding judgment come? And I haven't yet heard that answer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I noted when the Right Honourable and learned gentleman talked about the potential for real-world consequences coming from legal uncertainty that some on those benches actually laughed. Well, we do not find this subject an amusing one, Madam Deputy Speaker. We view this as incredibly serious. If we do not have a deal with Mauritius, they would have every incentive, and the members on the benches opposite know this, they would have every incentive to do a deal with someone else. We would face the risk of joint military exercises around the base. I didn't hear a single word about that from the benches opposite. We would face the risk of other countries setting up outposts on surrounding islands. Again, not a concern, it appears, for the opposition benches. And we would have the risk of hostile actors trying to interfere with crucial communications. And crucial communications they are, Madam Deputy Speaker. That is what is in our strategic defence interest, which she mentioned. And without a negotiated solution... No, I'll make progress. No, I will make progress. Without a negotiated solution... No, I will keep speaking, as is my right. Without a negotiated solution with Mauritius, they would pursue their legal campaign. They've made that very clear, as the honourable gentleman knows. That would lead to an inevitable legally binding judgment, and that would be, Madam Deputy Speaker, the position.
I will not have this level of shouting at the Minister. I will hear her And of course, it is within her right not to take interventions. But please, can members approach us in an orderly fashion? Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I was saying, if we saw that kind of situation, then we would unfortunately see international organisations following that determination. Organisations like the International Telecommunications Union. I heard from the front bench, let them have a go. Well, the consequences, Madam Deputy Speaker, of letting them have a go could be that critical spectrum for telecommunications that is absolutely essential for our security could be compromised. Again, an issue of which I heard nothing, sadly, from the opposition front bench. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the legal necessity of this deal has been recognised rightly by successive governments. And that is why, of course, well, I do think it's risible, yes, I agree with the chuntering, that the Conservatives undertook 11 rounds of negotiation on this subject, and they simply will not admit to having done so. Indeed, the Right Honourable Lady stated herself that was something that she could not speak about. Yes, very happy to.
Grateful for the Minister giving way on this point, because she's really at risk of not necessarily being accurate in her remarks. She is absolutely right that the Conservative government went into negotiations with Mauritius, but she seems to think that a starting of negotiations means that the end result must be capitulation and abiding by Mauritius's ideas. And can I just remind her, before other members stand up and read out the Labour Party briefing, it was a Conservative Foreign Secretary under Lord Cameron that deemed those negotiations weren't going in the British national interest and ended them.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I find the approach of the opposite benches on this subject very confusing. Some say shopping, I say confusing. We've had some who say they can't speak about those 11 rounds of negotiations. We had a moment ago an intervention stating that, they must have been completely different in content, but without actually spelling out why they were different in content. I find this a peculiar situation, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, there are many things that the Conservatives started which my side of the House did not want to continue, economic chaos and damage to our public services being some. But they did begin those negotiations and indeed had 11 rounds of them, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, on the... Yeah, happy to.
Is it something I said?
Something you're not allowed to say.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. I'm not a learned lawyer or former Attorney General like some of my esteemed colleagues.
Nobody's perfect.
But to an ordinary layperson, it sounds very much to me like the Honourable Lady and her government are prepared to give away sovereign British territory and billions of pounds of taxpayers' hard-earned income simply in case somebody brings a court case that may or may not be successful, possibly sometime in the future. Please, can she reassure me that isn't true?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say, I think the ordinary general public would be pretty concerned about a situation where we had the risk of joint... They laugh, Madam Deputy Speaker. They laugh about the risk of joint military operations around the base. They laugh about the risk of other countries setting up outposts on surrounding islands. And they seem to be unconcerned by the threat of hostile actors trying to interfere with crucial communications. Those matters are of concern to the public, and they are of concern to the government as well. Happy to.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I apologise, but to prevent the Minister inadvertently misleading the House, we have it in a parliamentary question from Sir Chris Bryant, ironically, that the international... Sorry.
Mr Francois, you know you mustn't refer to members by their name.
From the Minister for Telecommunications, that the International Telecommunications Union has no power to veto the use of military spectrum. That is the government's official position, so they couldn't interfere with satellites. Does the Minister now wish to correct her remarks?
I think I'll respond to the point of order first, which the Shadow Minister will know was not a point of order but a point of debate. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I don't want to embarrass the honourable gentleman, but he surely understands the difference between access to spectrum, which is the key issue here. It is critical, and I find it strange that he allots that issue so little consideration when it could be of such strategic importance to our country. Now, the Right Honourable Lady talked about remarks from the Mauritian Prime Minister, Ramgoolam. It appears that she's been looking them up at length on the internet and really spending a lot of time doing so. I therefore, Madam Deputy Speaker, find it rather strange that she didn't see what he stated on the 5th of February. Because on the 5th of February, he set the record straight about the terms of the deal. Perhaps she does know about this, but she chose not to refer to it in her remarks. He confirmed that what this government has been saying with clarity and consistency since the announcement of a political agreement in October. Let me spell out what we said about the duration and the terms of the treaty, and what Prime Minister Ramgoolam confirmed, which appears to have been missed in previous comments. The deal will be for 99 years and can be extended if both sides agree. The UK will additionally have a right of first refusal, meaning that the island cannot be given to any other country at the end of the treaty without us first agreeing. And there are no changes to the rights and authorities that we will have to operate the base. Parliament will have the opportunity to scrutinise the details of the treaty after signature when it's laid for scrutiny under the CRAG process before ratification. We would be delighted to have her scrutiny, of course, as would be usual. Now, on a different subject, Madam Deputy Speaker, to suggest there was an acceleration of these negotiations before the Mauritian elections flies in the face of the facts, as has been the case with many of the opposition's comments on this. When we took office, these negotiations had already been ongoing for 2 years. We continue to engage with the Mauritian government and to work in lockstep with the United States. Whilst we recognise that it was in the interest of all sides to finalise the deal quickly, we didn't put a completion date on the negotiations. We did not do so then, and we do not intend to do so now. We are, of course, engaging with the new US administration, of course, including, of course, discussing the full details of the agreement, just as we engaged, indeed, with the previous US administration. I find this rather strange that the opposition are confused around the nature of modern negotiations, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, as we in Mauritius have repeatedly said, including in joint statements on the 20th of December and on 13th of January, both sides remain committed to concluding a deal on the future of the Chagos Archipelago, which protects the long-term effective operation of the joint UK-US base on Diego Garcia, continuing the practice of the previous government. And as is usual in these circumstances, negotiations have been led by officials with clear guidance and oversight from ministers. And on the question regarding...
I have a feeling, Madam Deputy Speaker, I might need an invisibility cloak like the member of Tonbridge seems to have. That might well help us win in Ukraine. But to the point, I simply ask this. In the nature of transparency, the negotiators have been given a negotiation to be able to do. Could they tell us which budget this funding will come out of? Because they must know, when they go to negotiate, what they're actually negotiating. Crucial question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm more than happy to go into the financial question in a few moments, because this, again, sadly, is an issue about which the opposition had been deeply confused, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I will come to that in a few moments. Now, on the question regarding the Attorney-General, he met his Mauritian counterpart for a courtesy call, indeed, just as was stated, in fact, when he was in the UK in January. This meeting did not form part of the formal negotiations. Again, Madam Deputy Speaker, I find it strange that the term formal negotiations is not understood by the opposition benches, that they're confused on this point. And of course, on the broader question, the Attorney-General has been clear, just as with every other Attorney-General, whenever a conflict might be identified in any hypothetical circumstance, that will be dealt with as part of the proper process, and he would recuse himself if that were needed. Now, on the financial issue, I'm happy to...
The Honourable Lady, I appreciate the Honourable Lady's budget has been cut so much she's now put on the suicide watch to defend the undefensible for the government. Now, I appreciate... I appreciate that the howls of outrage from the benches opposite are going to be confected over this issue for the simple reason that the Honourable Lady has got nothing to add on a budgetary question that has gone from $13 billion to $6 and now is coming out of her budget. Will the Honourable Lady be absolutely clear with this government, with this House rather, that there is no way that she will be taking hard-earned taxpayers' money that should be going to support the poorest of the world and instead paying off a government that actually has no legal claim?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I know the gentleman is honourable. I think he may wish perhaps to reflect on the beginning of his remark, because I'm sure it conveyed something that is not his normal style at all. On the question that he asked around finances, it's very clear that a financial element was vital to secure a deal to protect the operation of such a vital base over the course of 99 years. If we don't pay, I'll say it again, someone else will. Our adversaries would jump at the chance to establish outposts on the outer islands. There's been a lot of inaccurate speculation about the cost of this treaty. Yes, happy to.
I genuinely appreciate the opportunity that she's given me to speak on this, but I'd like to clarify a point. She said it a couple of times now, I want to understand. She keeps saying that if we don't pay, someone else will. Who would be the recipient of that payment, considering the Chagos Islands are British sovereign territory? Is she suggesting another country would pay us? And if another country was going to pay Mauritius, why would they pay Mauritius? Because the Chagos Islands don't belong to Mauritius. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know that the right honourable gentleman understands full well this is because of the legal uncertainty that is created by the current situation that has been recognised time and again. That was the reason why his government engaged in 11 rounds of negotiations, and that is why there is that problem. And I am surprised that the opposite benches are so unconcerned about the contestation we see in that part of the world and the need for our country's interests to be put first. No, I will not take an additional intervention because my response has been very clear indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, on the subject, Madam Deputy Speaker, of inaccurate speculation about the cost of the treaty, Prime Minister Rangulam has confirmed that the reports of a doubling in value are completely false. The overall cost of the deal has not changed from that negotiated with the former Mauritian Prime Minister. There have been some changes to the financial arrangements to enable I was just about to get onto that. To enable a limited element of front-loading. But the overall net present value of the treatment payments, which accounts for the impact of indexation, is not higher than it was. And I will not press this point, Madam Deputy Speaker. It would be very unfair to the opposing benches. I have no doubt when they talk about economic illiteracy, they would not be surely falling into the trap of confusing timing with magnitude. Surely they would not be falling into that trap, Madam Deputy Speaker, because there's a pretty obvious difference between the two things. We will provide more information on the departmental budgetary impacts in due course. The details will be set out when the treaty is laid before Parliament. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we've seen more bizarre claims about this issue, even just within this debate. We heard wild enough ones earlier, frankly, when the Leader of the Opposition had her say, and the Prime Minister explained that she was wide of the mark. Now, of course, as colleagues would expect, any funding arrangement and the departmental split of any costs arising from the treaty with Mauritius will be finalised through the spending review. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been used to some pretty wild maths at points from the Conservatives. We had the true Tory kamikaze budget, of course, but they are surpassing themselves here, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it is ridiculous to compare. I will continue to explain why their attempt to compare speculative figures for the lifetime cost of a 99-year-long agreement to protect our national security cannot be compared with an annual uplift to defence spending, which is the largest since the Cold War. There's clearly a difference of many, many orders of magnitude, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I feel that they really need to reflect on this while they're making such bizarre claims. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, although this has necessarily been a state-to-state negotiation, with our priority being to protect the base, we recognise the importance of the islands to Chagosians and have worked hard to ensure this agreement reflects the importance of the islands to Chagosians. Some may say it's farcical to talk about Chagosians. I don't believe that it's farcical, Madam Deputy Speaker. As we've already announced, we will finance a new trust fund for Mauritius to use in support of the Chagosian community. We will work with Mauritius to start a new programme of visits for Chagosians to the Chagos archipelago, including to Diego Garcia, and Mauritius will be free to develop a programme of resettlement on the islands other than Diego Garcia. And separate to the agreement, yes, happy to.
And I have to say, she is putting up a very loyal and heroic defence of her government's policy. But I predict that if the government persists with this proposal, it will become a running sore for the governing party, and they will rue the day, because the British people will know that they've just given away a sovereign territory unnecessarily, and what's more, they've put the icing on the cake with billions of pounds of taxpayers' money. They will never live it down. So my advice to the government is quit while you can.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do appreciate the kind tone in which he expressed, the Right Honourable Gentleman expressed his remarks. However, I would say respectfully that the running sore has been a situation that has led to our country's national security being subject to legal jeopardy because this issue had not been resolved. The government, on whose benches, of course, he sat previously, negotiated 11 rounds with Mauritius on this subject, and that is what this government has been determined to make progress on for the sake of our national security. And I will, Madam Deputy Speaker, give way to my honourable friend. Thank you.
Thank the Minister for giving. I thank the Minister for giving way, and I would ask, what was the point of the opposition starting a negotiation if there was no intent to reach an agreed solution? And if there was a red line, which they are now saying there is, where is it published?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I couldn't have said it better myself. Indeed, that is the nub of the point. Now, also on the subject of Chagosians, separate to the agreement, I do want to inform the House that we will also increase our support to Chagosians who are living in the UK and around the world through new and existing projects. I know another issue that's been of considerable interest to members has been, of course, the environment. We have secured a deal that will help protect the unique environment of the Chagos archipelago, one of the world's most important marine environments, to which both the UK and Mauritius have committed. The agreement will be supported by an enhanced partnership between the UK and Mauritius, under which the UK will support Mauritius's ambitions to establish a marine protected area that protects the globally significant ecosystems in the Chagos archipelago. And that's particularly important when it comes to protecting their biodiversity, when it comes to ensuring that they're protected against threats like illegal fishing and unreported and unregulated fishing activities as well. That's why, yes, happy to give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. I am struck by the fact that it did take nearly an hour of discussion and debate in this chamber for Chagosians to be mentioned for the first time. Not a single member of Her Majesty's loyal opposition chose to mention Chagosians in their multiple interventions. I, however, have spoken to Chagosians over many months and years. I have spoken to Chagosians over many months and years. And one of the things that they have told me is that they are genuinely fearful of being traded from the United Kingdom to Mauritius, a government, a government who have treated...
I'm sure the honourable gentleman is getting to his point, but interventions really should be shorter than this. He could have put in to speak in the debate had he wished. A few more moments, that is all.
Thank you. I would simply ask the Minister, what role have Chagosians played in the negotiations up till this point? The Honourable Lady mentions our marine protection area. I know for a fact that Chagosians have not been negotiated on that particular point.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And he is right to raise this issue. Of course, he understands that the negotiations were between the UK and Mauritius, with our priority, as we indeed have been discussing, to secure the full operation of the base on Diego Garcia. However, we do recognise the importance of the islands, of course, to Chagosians, and that's why they were engaged with after this deal. And I think it's very important to respect the fact that there are different views within the Chagosian community. They don't speak with one voice, as of course no community does. And for example, the Chagos Refugees Group, one of the largest Chagosian groups, has welcomed the agreement, but we will continue to ensure that we are having those discussions with them, particularly with those, of course, based in the UK. On the subject of the environment, Madam Deputy Speaker, just to lastly mention that this agreement, with its environmental focus, has been welcomed by instrumental conservation NGOs, including the Zoological Society of London. So, in conclusion, the deal... Yes, happy to.
For giving way, could she just, for this moment, just acknowledge the hardship and the horrors that all Chagosians have been through ever since they were illegally expelled from their islands many years ago, and that they all deserve recognition, and that the islands themselves should never have been separated from Mauritius anyway. And what we're now doing is correcting an historical... We are now correcting an historical wrong, and I'd ask her not to be invited down a neo-colonial route by the Conservative Party today.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would not be invited down any route by the Conservative Party, because I think we all know where it leads to rack and ruin. Of course, that situation for Chagosians, many of them, has been very difficult. I know this is an issue that is of concern to those members, particularly where they represent a number of UK-based Chagosians, and that is why, as I said, that engagement has been important, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, in conclusion, this deal has had support across the US national security apparatus. Fine, I'll take one last one, thank you.
Grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she's putting up a gallant fight in a very difficult situation. But for the avoidance of doubt, is she saying that there is another court other than the ICJ that could compel this country to give up the Chagos Islands? And if so, will she identify that court?
Yeah. What I have said, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that there is clear risk to critical functions of that base on Diego Garcia because of legal jeopardy. The benches opposite, Madam Deputy Speaker, do not appear to be aware of those issues for contractors, for insurers, for communications, the risk of hostile states when it comes to the outlying islands. Well, the government is concerned about that risk, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I did detail earlier the 28 different judges and arbitrators who've expressed an opinion on this. I'm afraid it's simply for the birds to suggest there's no legal jeopardy here, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, in conclusion, as I was stating, this deal has had support across the US national security apparatus. The previous US administration supported the deal. The new US administration is rightly ensuring they are satisfied. The deal has been welcomed by India and the UN Secretary-General. Now, the Right Honourable Lady mentioned China in her remarks, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I know, again, Conservative governments have been confused about China. They've oscillated all over the place in their relationship. But I wonder if she could tell me, or anyone could tell me, if China has welcomed this deal. No, a pin could drop, Madam Deputy Speaker. They have not welcomed it because they know it will strengthen our country's position in the region for the foreseeable future. Security has to be our priority, Madam Deputy Speaker. But we have also negotiated an agreement that protects the unique marine environment and reflects Chagosian's demand. This deal will protect the base, solidify our relationship with our closest ally and reinforce the UK's global leadership. Anyone who values UK national security and that of our allies should back this deal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I address the position of the Government, I feel obliged to respond to the comments of the Shadow Foreign Secretary, who has so kindly spent her evenings reviewing the proceedings of the Mauritian Parliament for all of our benefit. She has pressed the Government on why it has advanced this deal. Yet she had no answer to my honourable and gallant friend from Tunbridge Wells on why her government began talks with Mauritius. The pronouncements of the Right Honourable Lady about lawyers and the judiciary are consistent with a party that has long since given up on upholding the rule of law. The Right Honourable and learned member for Kenilworth and Southam is a lone voice in standing up for the force of law. He rightly observes that the UK does not subject itself to the rulings of the ICJ in respect of contentious cases with Commonwealth countries. Yet he raises 2 points which the Right Honourable Lady did not address. Firstly, that the UK has subjected itself to the jurisdiction of the ICJ and its predecessors since 1929. And second, that since this discussion flows from an advisory opinion of the ICJ, which she now says is unjustified or irrelevant, why did the Conservative government feel compelled to begin talks and conduct more than 10 rounds of negotiations? Liberal Democrats, unlike the Conservatives or Reform, believe that the UK is stronger when it works cooperatively with other countries, stronger when it supports the rule of international law, and stronger when it takes action to support international institutions. That is why we believe the UK should take seriously the advisory opinion of the ICJ and other legal opinions on this question, and why the Conservative government was right to open negotiations and the Labour government was right to continue them. All that said, Madam Deputy Speaker, the process of agreeing a treaty over the last few months has been nothing short of shambolic. There are 3 critical issues in this sorry tale, and I regret to say that the government has failed on each of them. First, the security of the United Kingdom. For decades, Diego Garcia has been a key strategic asset. Its importance has only increased over time in light of the changing threat picture and the increasing aggression shown by China. The chaos of this negotiation has not given any reassurance that our security is being safeguarded. Second, as my honourable friend has mentioned, the rights of the Chagosian people. Since the 1960s, they have been displaced and decisions taken about them without them, to use a phrase the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister have recently adopted. In October, I met outside Parliament with Chagosians who live in the UK and want to have a say in the future of their islands. They were highly critical of not being a part of these negotiations. Third, the role of Parliament in these negotiations. Liberal Democrats have long argued that international treaties should come to this House before signature so that parliamentarians can scrutinise the government's proposals. In this case, the government rushed to an agreement with Mauritius that promptly unravelled. Why have the Mauritian Parliament and Donald Trump been given a say about British sovereign territory, but this Parliament has not? The government has repeatedly obfuscated and refused to provide detail of this deal to Parliament. If it is true that the cost is in excess of £9 billion, taxpayers in the UK will want to know how the government has found this funding when winter fuel payments have been scrapped, family farms are being threatened, and charities and health providers are being hit with national insurance increases. So can the Minister please tell me, what security guarantees are contained in the draft treaty? Will Parliament be given a vote on the treaty before it is signed? How much will be paid to Mauritius as part of the deal? And will Chagosians be included in the future process of agreement?
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The party opposite pretends to recognise the serious threats that we face. But bringing forward yet another debate on this topic, just as our Prime Minister heads out to Washington in order to broker a just peace for Ukraine, is an act of blatant sabotage against our national interest. Yesterday we saw a superficial and unconvincing performance of consensus from the opposition front bench, who cannot bring themselves to recognise this government is delivering on national defence and security commitments in a way that they could not for the past 14 years. In particular, with relation to our 2.5% increase in GDP on defence spending in order to protect our country. But let's face it, the leader of the opposition is so desperate for shares on X that she is incapable of engaging in sobering geopolitical realities, just at the moment that national consensus is needed. The truth is that none of us yet know the exact details of the financial security component of the proposed deal with Mauritius, which means that the purpose of this debate is clear. It is not intended to enable an honest and informed debate about how we can best secure our UK defence and security interests in the Indian Ocean over the next century. Instead, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is designed to maximise the chance of a damaging dispute about this with our US allies, just at the moment when all our energy and diplomatic capital needs to be brought to bear to persuade the US of the need for continued commitments to European security and security guarantees for Ukraine. It is why certain voices have turned up today when they have been absent in all of our national security discussions or discussions on Ukraine. If the opposition succeeds in this, it will do enormous damage to our national security and that of our European allies. Another aspect of this issue that the opposition is determined to disregard the fundamental importance of the rule of international law to our national interests and security. First and foremost, this is critical to our diplomacy in support of Ukraine. Russia's invasion is a clear breach of the UN Charter, and it is on that basis that many countries around the world continue to vote with us, including earlier this week, in cases where they are non-aligned. I fully understand that there are a range of views about the legalities, but the direction of travel is clear, and we cannot uphold the principle of a rules-based international order on one hand, while completely disregarding multiple findings of international courts on the other. And finally, as I have said many times now in this place, my experience of discussions with US defence colleagues shows a clear and settled preference for legally binding and secure agreements, particularly around the basing arrangements. Those preferences are important for long-term relationships with the US, and so is the clear support for the deal from India, whose partnership we must prize highly in this increasingly fragmented world. These live diplomatic questions should be dealt with sensitively, Madam Deputy Speaker, and in a way that seeks cross-party consensus across the House, most of all at this critical time when we need to present a united face to a bitterly divided world. Ultimately, if a treaty with Mauritius is delivered, it will ensure the continued ability of UK and US defence and security assets to operate in the region for many decades to come. That objective is vitally important for our national security, in contrast to the opposition's motion today, which does nothing but undermine them. Thank you.
Sir Iain Duncan Smith.
Deputy Speaker, we are short on time and I know others want to come in, so I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. The point, I follow on the honourable gentleman, who is my neighbour, and I know and respect him very much. Don't agree with him fully on this, but I have to say he makes his point forcibly. But the one thing I want to come back to is legal uncertainty. Now, the point about legal uncertainty is if it's unclear whether or not the original judgment from the ICJ was stood as an absolute judgment. And, of course, we know very well that the section of that agreement said quite clearly any dispute with the government of any other country which has been a member of the Commonwealth is therefore beyond them. So when they make their ruling, it was clear from the very beginning this was an advisory judgment. It was not a judgment based in a legal position, it was simply advisory. I also remind everybody what I said earlier on, is that many of those who were part of that judicial process are themselves not really long-standing judiciary in the sense as we would understand it here in the UK. So many of them are political. Yes. Now, the woman, the Vice President, President Zhu, she wrote this from the word go, and she has been heavily engaged working within the Chinese government for some considerable time. And whether or not we think that China has welcomed something, and they're not that stupid as to publicly welcome something to give us an excuse to say it's terrible, and I say that as someone who is sanctioned by them, and the reality is that they are there as the major threat. The point I simply make is that China watches this and knows that they're in a far better and stronger position if there is considerable doubt here about what is going on with ownership. And that is the problem that we face from the word go. And I did ask the Right Honourable Lady a very important question. I don't believe the last government, when it entered into discussions, waived that requirement that the Commonwealth issues cannot be touched by this court. They have to, under that agreement, waive if they're going to subdue themselves to the judgment of that court. And, of course, I ask her again, and I'll happily take this intervention, has this government... No, wait, before she starts giving us that kind of lectury look, let me just say to her... No, she does. She does. Listen, I'm very happy, instead of putting on this face of tut-tutting, if she could just answer this question. I'll take this intervention, did this government, at any stage during these negotiations, waive their right not to see this other than as advisory? If she wants to give way on that, will she say, have they waived that exemption?
Mr. Speaker, I made that very clear previously. That carve-out for the Commonwealth is very clear within the ICJ, and I'm terribly sorry. I think I actually looked at him with a smile. If that is somehow intellectually way, then I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
That's a no.
Very careful, I might be asking her how to share a drink with me later on. I have to say to the Honourable Lady, I know, it's irresistible, isn't it? The main point I say to her, she didn't. That is as clear as mud. A very specific question, did they waive their right over this particular agreement? So that makes this, from the word go, not inconclusive and not, therefore, a mysterious judgment. It is an advisory judgment, and the government does have no reason or pressure to accept it. That means that her other legal case...
Does the Right Honourable Member agree with me that the irony that we are apparently willing to give in to a judgment from a judge from China who oversaw the erosion of the rights of the people of Hong Kong in violation of our agreement with them is really shocking to me and shows the weaknesses in being slavishly adherent to international law.
Yeah, the interesting point about this is, and I raise it because the Honourable General who spoke before me, he said that we should essentially remember that this is also about the security of Ukraine and others. I fully agree with him. But 3 of those judges voted against censure of Russia when they invaded Ukraine. So we've got to be very careful about this because their ulterior motive is something quite different from what he quite legitimately claims to be one of our reasons, and I fully agree with him on that basis. So obeying the law, this is the law. We do not have a judgment from a court that can be held by other United Nations bodies as standing. And if that is the case, then all the other legal points that they only suddenly started raising, the government, after they realised this was advisory, don't stand either, because it would be ultra vires of these bodies to suddenly claim that there was a judgment against us, and therefore bodies such as the International Telecommunications Union, to act on that basis, would also of itself be in transgression of what was in the original agreement. And I just simply say to the Honourable Lady, and the Honourable Gentleman who spoke for the Liberal Democrats, made some of these points, but I just want to raise quickly. The fact is that Chagossians that I have spoken to have all said they would rather be UK passport holders, and they just want to go home. And going home means that bad judgment in the 60s gets turned around, and they can go back to their territory. I would have loved that to have happened from day one. That would have solved this point. They don't want to be under the suzerainty of any other country other than the UK and have their possessions back. And so the reality is we didn't really ask them about that, and we should have done from day one. And I simply also say that it would help the government's argument that they're acting in public interest if they were much more open about what has been going on within these negotiations. There is a legitimate question. We all unite behind the idea of the Prime Minister raising defence spending. We wish him the best when he goes to Washington. It's in our public interest. And I would stand nobody on my basis of his support for him in this. And I made it clear yesterday at Prime Minister's question, earlier on the Prime Minister's question. The statement, rather, I beg your pardon. And the reality I therefore ask them, why is it that they simply will not answer this question about where any money in this agreement is going to be taken from? Surely that way would end all the debate. They don't have to say what the amount is. They simply have to say it will come from the defence budget, it will come from whatever budget it is. And if they said that, that would make it look open. And would they please also open up about what they've been discussing? Because it's all stalled now, so maybe they should reflect on the difficulties. Madam Deputy Speaker, the reality is that I think this whole process has been ill thought through. And the reality is that what we need now to do is to make sure that the government stops, rethinks this process, and doesn't search for excuses that are not legal at all, but actually accepts the fact that our security and that of the whole of the trade routes that cross through this are under threat if the government proceeds with this process.
Lillian Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy. I'm pleased to speak in this debate. However, it is disappointing that His Majesty's opposition felt the need to use part of their opposition day to debate this issue, given that important negotiations continue between His Majesty's government and Mauritius and on the future of the Seychelles Islands. It's never wise. It's never ever wise to give a running commentary on complex negotiations. Perhaps the opposition should have been more patient. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand that these negotiations so far have been productive, with both countries reiterating their commitment to finalising a treaty as soon as possible, with terms agreeing to ensuring the long-term, secure and effective operation of the existing base of Diego Garcia and Mauritian sovereignty over the archipelago. Now, I believe this deal will protect UK and US national security interests by ensuring long-term effective operations of the base. Since its creation, the British Indian Ocean Territory and the UK-US military base has had a contested existence. It was only a matter of time before the UK would have to choose between breaking international law or negotiating from a position of weakness and risking national security. It was therefore necessary to pursue an agreement to ensure the stability of the base. Now, I also believe that it is right to give the new US administration the chance to consider the full agreement properly. Now, I'm pleased that the Government will finance a new trust fund for Mauritius to use in support of the Chagosian community. Together, Mauritius and the UK will also now work to start a new programme of visits to the Chagos archipelago for Chagosians. This is a bilateral agreement between the UK and Mauritius. Now, we are mindful that the future of the islands is an important issue for the Chagosian community. Their interests have been an important part of the negotiations. As the UK has previously made clear, the way Chagosians were removed from the Chagos archipelago and the way they were treated thereafter was wrong. So the Government has restated its commitment to supporting Chagosians in the UK, with all Chagosians remaining eligible for British citizenship and to make a home in the UK. Now, the FCDO has also declared that officials will continue to engage with different Chagosian groups over a range of issues. Now, this agreement also shuts down any possibility of the Indian Ocean being used as a dangerous illegal migration route to the UK, with Mauritius taking responsibility for any future arrivals. I am reassured that Parliament will have the ability to scrutinise the treaty under the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act as a standard for international agreements. I am also reassured that this will be a unique agreement, and the Government has stressed that it has no bearing on wider UK Government policy regarding other overseas territories. This agreement does not signal any change in policy to Britain's other overseas territories, and past press speculation was factually wrong. The Chagos Islands are a very different issue with a very different history. We stand 100% behind the right to self-determination for the people of Falklands and Gibraltar. The military base on Diego Garcia is vital to our national security, and I welcome the Government taking on these negotiations as their best way to secure the future of the base. The Government inherited a situation where the long-term future of the military base was under threat. I am glad, therefore, that the Government has secured a deal that protects the base for at least 99 years, a period that can be extended. Now, within the deal, there will be clear commitments for robust security arrangements. That, along with our guarantees to the Chagosian people, gives me confidence that this Labour Government is doing the right thing. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Gagan Mohindra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank Nick Coombs from my office for helping me draft what was a long speech, which I will not be mostly using given the time constraints. Can I try and lower the tone of what is a very passionate debate? I've got immense respect for the Minister, and she's had a very difficult outing today, and she's held up high. But I know that her former career as a lecturer will hopefully hold this House in good stead. And so can she educate us on some basic questions? Because this is the second time this week that I've asked questions about Chagosian Islands, and I'm yet still confused. We, on this side, entered into negotiation 11 times. I know that the junior PPS is very eager, but please do let me say a few more words. My government entered into negotiations 11 times. As anyone with any semblance of business experience will know, is you enter a negotiation, but sometimes you don't always achieve an end result. I know that this Labour government won on the 4th of July, but within 3 months they decided to do differently to what my government had done 11 times, where we closed the negotiations by the end with Lord Cabinet of the other place. So can she explain the rationale, what materially changed? Because we've heard about the judgment, the advisory judgment by the ICJ. I'm not a lawyer, I've never claimed to be. That will help us understand actually what has changed to better educate myself and my constituents on why we're giving our sovereign islands away when the world is becoming increasingly more dangerous. There are various media reports that suggest that there will be increased lobbying from the Mauritian government and those that they listen to that suggest that they may look to revisit the terms of whatever deal we do to their benefit. Now, the frustration that you've heard from our side of the chamber is the lack of detail. Your government came in, campaigned... Sorry. Yes, of course.
Thank you. I welcome the members' interest in the Chagos Islands and desire for detail. It's obviously an issue that he's very passionate about, having not mentioned it in the previous sitting of this House in his time since 2010. But I wonder if, with his desire for detail, he could let us know the name of the 4 main Chagos Islands.
Not been to that part of the world, but as the new member will learn, the longer that he's in this place, certain positions do not give you the ability to actually speak in the chamber, one of which is a government whip. I was also the former PPS, the Foreign Secretary, so again, you don't speak about your own department. Going back to the actual substance of the debate, I've tried to approach this with a modicum of decency to actually try and get some reasonable answers that all of us want to hear. I think one of the concerns that we have on this side of the House is the seemingly bull in a china shop way that this government is choosing to actually force through a deal that we will not have sight on until after it's signed. Yeah. There are continuing questions about money. I know the Prime Minister had a redacted statement that was shared with my front bench yesterday that was quickly amended, and it allowed our side not to have enough time to properly scrutinise. Going back to the member for Leyton and Wanstead, who I thank for his gallant service, we are in a democracy, so the ability to debate and disagree is what makes us stronger. Now, I hope the Minister or whoever's winding up on behalf of the government are able to clarify some reasonable questions that we've consistently asked, and going back saying you've said it to us means that, given her former academic background, I would hope she'd understand. If a student says, I don't understand, you find a different way of answering it, which means that we on this side will hopefully get a better rationale of what your government, or the government, is trying to achieve. Sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker. The frustration we've heard from the Shadow Foreign Secretary about information coming from the Mauritian Hansard, I think is discourtesy to this House. I know if Mr Speaker was in the chair, he would always want this House to be informed of any detail that's in the public domain, and he's rightly going to be investigating why certain details yesterday were in the public domain before they were put forward to this House. So can I urge the government and the front bench that where things are in the public domain, they share it with us in a way that we can properly analyse and scrutinise. The role of any parliamentarian is to be a critical friend of legislation and the future for our country. And I think the reason why Mr Speaker and the Speaker's panel allow continual debates on this issue is we on this side are not satisfied, but also the great people in the chair are also. Now, while this may be that you'll have continual UQs and statements, I think for your own benefit, as a Foreign Office Minister, I'd prefer that you were out in the world flying the British flag on our behalf. But I will continue to lobby for UQs on this specific topic, because actually having some basic details of what you are trying to achieve, what the government is trying to achieve, I think is perfectly reasonable. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Louise Jones.
Right, that the opposition has picked this topic again is very symbolic to me. They have decided that their outright rejection by the electorate last year was not based on the fact that they had not done a good job delivering for the improvements of what my constituents care about. Instead, Madam Deputy Speaker, they've decided that where they made a mistake was getting the vibes wrong. So they spend their time putting out little pictures online, vowing to defend Western civilization, informing us that they are conservative realists, and again debating the Chagos Islands. We could have chosen, Madam Deputy Speaker, to discuss health and the NHS. My constituents in Kilmarnock frequently have issues accessing GP appointments because we simply do not have enough GPs. NHS dentist appointments for adults are almost non-existent, and I welcome the recent announcement for several thousand extra appointments in Derbyshire. Perhaps we could have heard what the Conservative solution... Sorry, yes, of course.
So I'm a bit confused once again from the government benches. I thought the debate was about the British Indian Ocean Territory rather than GP surgeries.
Don't worry, the night is yet young, and I will get onto that, Stooch. Perhaps we could have heard what the Conservative solution to these issues with health might have been. But now that they have had the time in opposition to reflect on the many ways that they cause these issues in the first place. Instead, we are talking about the Chagos Islands. Perhaps we could have discussed what other kind of measures are desperately needed in a constituency like mine in North East Derbyshire, such as better buses, investment in transport infrastructure such as light and heavy rail, a step change in educational opportunities for our young people, energy security, and how we provide affordable houses.
I thank my gallant and honourable friend for giving way. I pay tribute to her service and also the other member for Leyton's service. I wonder if she could call back to that experience and say what kind of support did those in the forces want? Did they want extra funding for our defence, or did they want another debate about the Chagos Islands?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he is exactly right. The people in the armed forces would have liked to have heard about the support that they need for them to do their jobs, the improvements to their accommodation, what we're doing to improve their forces, and of course, how we are certifying the future of a very important base that many of them are relying on. Of course I will, yes.
Not only an honourable lady, but an honourable comrade, as she formerly was, we formerly were. We both heard the announcement yesterday and today of the extra money going to defence, and I think we both welcomed the announcement. The thing that troubles us, and the thing that I'm sure she would share concern at, is that if you look at the way the maths seems to be working out, particularly with the comments by the Prime Minister's spokesman today, it appears that actually that wasn't a rise in defence spending, but, once this is taken into account, a cut in defence spending. Now, isn't that a matter of some concern when you factor in the cost of the Chagos, the single intelligence account, and the other elements that have been landed on to this increase? It actually looks like a decrease.
I thank the honourable member for his opinion, and I would remind him that this is the largest increase in defence funding since the Cold War. And I'm sure he's aware of the considerable damage that has been done to the armed forces over the last 15 years that myself and others who have served saw firsthand. Right, where were we? We're talking about the Chagos Islands again. And we could, Madam Deputy Speaker, have been speaking about antisocial behaviour and other crime like that in my constituency. We really struggle in Dronfield with car theft, with gangs exploiting county lines, issues with off-road bikes, mobile phone theft. Of course I will. Yes.
I thank the honourable and gallant member for giving way. Does she not think that her constituents have the right to know how much this is going to cost them before this deal is negotiated and finished?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I know it is multiple times in Hansard about the projected cost, and I look forward to seeing the final results of the negotiation in due course. Right, where are we? Right, so as I was saying, it is already well documented in Hansard that these negotiations were started by the Conservative government. And I think we all deserve to know the reason why they decided to start them in the first place. And I quote, they were necessary to ensure, and I quote, the continued effective operation of the joint UK-US military base on Diego Garcia. They knew that the status quo was not tenable and a poor choice. So, this deal, and let's just keep it real here and just make sure that it's on the record, this deal is the only way to ensure legal certainty for a vital base. Like it or not, doing nothing has left us under the threat of legal challenges, which jeopardise the future of the base. That is a fact. In my corner of the military, I was well aware of the vital importance of this base, and I'm glad that we are securing it now. I can assure you that unlike the Leader of the Opposition, who, as a couple of weeks ago, had refused a classified briefing on the base, please correct me if I am wrong on this point, I know what I am talking about. If the party opposite would like to suggest a better idea that isn't just do nothing, then I would be interested to hear a credible point of view. Otherwise, forgive me if I will support what actually will work. So, when I go back to the constituency and I have my surgeries and I knock on doors, as I will do so tomorrow, I will be happy to tell my constituents this answer. But I know it won't be needed, because they will not be asking me about the Chagos Islands. Instead, my constituents rightly prioritise health, transport, education, immigration and housing. They would rightly wonder why these are not also the priority of a political party interested in their vote. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, doing nothing was the hallmark of the previous Conservative government, and it looks like irrelevance will be the hallmark of the Conservative opposition going forwards.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say, as an elected representative of a very young political party, I watched this game going on between the two old parties and find it difficult to conclude that it's anything other than a complete and utter charade. Whilst I agree with the Right Honourable Member from Witham, who made the argument this is British sovereign territory, there is nothing to be gained, literally nothing to be gained, by giving it away, and I see the benches behind her cheering, but this was the party that went through, as we heard earlier, 11 rounds of negotiations. The Conservative government was happy to surrender the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands, but didn't like the final shape of the deal. And then we go on to the government, who tell us this has to be done because of legal uncertainty. But of course, there is no legal uncertainty whatsoever. And you know, you can shake your heads if you want, but you know I'm right. The ICJ has no jurisdiction over this whatsoever. So why are we doing it? Well, I guess, of course, post-colonial guilt, a government run by human rights lawyers. Beyond that, I really don't understand it. But you know something? I made a comment earlier about the cost. I promise you, 90 million a year for 99 years with £3, with 3% compounded inflation is £52 billion. That, of course, is madness. And members of this House have been saying, why are we not debating health or other issues? Well, 50 billion quid is a very good reason to debate this. I've tried in this House and elsewhere to make these arguments. I've explained that China already has a smart city right next to Port Louis. I've explained that Huawei are the communication system. You can see now, of course, that Prime Minister Modi is worried on missing out on the action. There is a 200-mile marine park which potentially has cobalt and other mineral resources that could be worth tens, perhaps even hundreds of billions of pounds over the next few years, and we're prepared to give it all away. And the timing of this debate's perfect, because the Prime Minister is mid-Atlantic as we speak. Now, I have spoken in the course of the last week to American cabinet ministers. And whilst they're concerned about Chagos, they're even more concerned about bringing an end to the war in Ukraine, which I think we're all very, very keen to see, provided that it's on the right terms. There is also going to be a big debate about tariffs. So here's the point. Chagos is not especially high on the American agenda at the moment. I would love to see the American administration veto this terrible deal. But I'm not even sure then that this government will move its position. They are clearly hell-bent on giving away the Chagos Islands, whatever the risks to global security, whatever the risks to our own budgetary constraints, and having ignored completely the will of the majority of the Chagosian people. If that's the case, I would rather see America have the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands than a corrupt Mauritius. Why don't we, if we're going to give this up, let's sell. Let's get a few billion quid for the Mauritius Islands, for the Chagos Islands. Mauritius has no legal basis, no legal claim, and you know what? Investment would come. The Chagosians could go back and get well-paid jobs. I want us to keep sovereignty, but if you're prepared to give away this country's interests, sell it to America, don't give it away to corrupt Mauritius.
Anna Gelderd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have all seen what a disregard for international law looks like when it plays out on the world stage. And that is why it is right and necessary to take a deliberate, considered approach when taking decisions that affect our national security and our global standing. Decisions must protect us here at home and are in step with our allies. With an agreement on the future of the Chagos Islands, we have upheld our commitments and protected our interests in the Indian Ocean. As someone who has sat around diplomatic tables over the years, I would caution anyone against reading meaning into a look or indeed a smile. It is the words on the page at the end of the day that matter. National defence always comes first. It is important to recognise the strategic role of ensuring a stable environment. After the Minister has highlighted, the Chagos Marine Protected Area, first established in 2010, demonstrates UK leadership. It is a shining example of marine protection, covering over 640,000 square kilometres, more than 8 times the size of the UK, and is crucial. As a fully protected marine protected area, this site is of global significance, providing an important refuge for many, and it plays a crucial role in building resilience. And yet, the Conservatives started these negotiations. 11 rounds of talks later, they failed to deliver. We have agreed an agreement that safeguards the long-term future of the base, strengthens our relationship with Mauritius and protects our strategic interests in the region. This government has delivered where the last failed, an outcome the opposition must start to get used to.
You've got time. Okay. Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I just start by paying tribute to Henry Smith, a former member of this House, who did an enormous amount of work over many years representing the Chagosian voice in our country and in making sure that their voices were heard in these important debates. Now, I agree with Henry that we did, as a country, a huge wrong to those people in not allowing them to return to their country. And sadly, what this deal does is embed that wrong in perpetuity. It's a wrong that should have been righted on many occasions. It's a wrong that should never have been done in the first place. But to embed it now in this treaty is genuinely shameful, because this country deserves better than that, and those people deserve better than that. Now, we've heard the debate about security, and it's a bizarre argument that to swap a freehold for a leasehold is somehow to guarantee security in the long term. If any of them would like to sell me their houses and then rent that house back off me, I'd be delighted to enter into those negotiations. Clearly, that seems to be the way they believe property ownership works. I will give way.
I'm reminded of the Allington Homes deal under a previous Conservative government, but that is not the point of my intervention. My question is, if he believes that there is absolutely no reason to have started negotiations, would he say the previous Conservative government made a mistake in beginning them?
The Honourable Lady is aware, because I've been on the record on this, that I was entirely critical of the beginning of those negotiations when I was in the government. I will now give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Well, I'm grateful to the former Security Minister for giving way, and I put this question to him. How can the base, which serves an indispensable naval, air and intelligence asset, be more secure under the sovereignty of another nation rather than their own? Not my words, the words of another former Security Minister, Lord West.
My honourable friend knows well that the noble Lord, the former Labour Security Minister and, of course, former First Sea Lord, knows well that these bases occupy a really crucial part, not just in our air bases as strategic reach into the Middle East, into Southeast Asia, but actually in the intelligence collection business that, sadly, we need to be engaged in to keep our people safe. And the idea that we should be doing this, the idea that we should be handing over these bases in order to somehow satisfy an advisory ruling is, I'm afraid, wrong. Now, in the interests of space and time, I will merely I will give way one last time.
Thank you. I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. As he touches upon the point around the ICJ, does my right honourable friend agree with me that not only is the ICJ decision non-binding, but it's also perverse in that two of the judges who sit on this, Kirill Gevorgian, who is a key acolyte of Putin, and Shui Hankin, a Chinese official, who both voted against condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, do not represent anything other than the interests of our adversaries.
I think the point that my honourable friend is correctly making is that this is a political judgment. And it's a rational and reasonable political judgment for Moscow and Beijing to make. The problem is, it's being made in Westminster. Now, this is an error. It's sadly an error that we will pay for generations. It's an error that will haunt us and an error, sadly, that will cost us. And on that basis, Madam Deputy Speaker, I urge the government to do what they know is right and not to continue with the argument that my honourable friend has made in pointing out that we should never have started these talks. Well, if that is true, why are they finishing them? Drop this, drop these talks and end this argument.
I now call the front benches because time is short, and I call the Shadow Defence Secretary of State, James Cartledge.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to all colleagues who have participated in today's debate. In a week where the biggest domestic issue has been defence spending, there was one thing we needed from the government today: transparency. Every penny involved in this terrible Chagos deal will be public money from the pockets of hard-pressed taxpayers. The government must be straight with the British people about how much money is being spent and on what. The fact is, after the opposition has raised the cost of Chagos and all the related issues in 6 separate Defence and FCDO oral questions, 2 urgent questions, plus multiple written questions, points of order and Prime Minister's questions, we are still none the wiser on how much Labour's terrible Chagos deal is going to cost and what its impact will be on the defence budget. And the Prime Minister has led from the front when it comes to a complete failure to be open with taxpayers on where their hard-earned money is going to go. Yesterday, before the Prime Minister made his statement on defence spending, the Leader of the Opposition was, as is the convention, given a copy of his speech in advance. Except, as Mr Speaker made very clear is definitely not the convention, all of the key financial information was completely redacted. We had no chance as an opposition to do the sums before the statement which would have shown this claim of a £13.4 billion increase to defence spending was, in the words of Paul Johnson of the IFS, playing silly games with numbers. And the Prime Minister continued to make that claim today about defence spending, despite the Secretary of State for Defence, who want to suspend that budget, saying the figure this morning is actually £6 billion. But even if the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Defence are at odds on overall defence spending, where they are united with the rest of their government is a total silence in one respect: the cost of their Chagos deal. Now, the Prime Minister was asked by the Leader of the Opposition and my honourable friend for Bexhill and Battle 3 straight yes-no questions today as to whether the cost of the Chagos deal would come from the defence budget. 3 times he refused to give a straight answer. Why can't the government answer the question? Is it because reports in the press are right that the total cost is between £9 billion and £18 billion, not including indexation? Potentially 3 years' worth of the entire additional defence increase, that is using the figure used by the Secretary of State for Defence, not the Prime Minister's one. Or is it much more simple, Madam Deputy Speaker? The government knows that if the truth of the actual spending figure came out, the public would be aghast. I'm just going to make this point. The public understand one basic truth. To lease back a military base we currently own freehold for many billions of pounds makes no sense at all. Give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Does he not accept that the government has already said it will bring the full details of the deal to this House for discussion and consideration, and that will include the cost? And does he also not accept that it is with President Trump's team and it is right that our US allies consider the details of that deal before they come to the same conclusion as the previous administration?
I have to say to the honourable gentleman, he's doing well on getting a PPS ship. But this is Parliament. Parliament's role, ever since it started, is to approve money for the executive. That is our constitutional role. And we cannot do that unless they tell us the truth about how much money they're going to spend. I give way to our own friend.
The Shadow Defence Secretary should be aware that it was the Prime Minister who came forward and said how he was going to spend that funding. This side of the House therefore need to know if the defence increase by his announcement includes the Chagos deals. That's their decision on that side, so they have to put it to this House first, because it doesn't make any difference whether it comes to Parliament already. It's the defence budget we're talking about.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, and he's absolutely right. Why can't they tell us whether this will come from the defence spending uplift? It's public money. It's not their money. It comes from from taxpayers who are already overtaxed enough. They could at least tell them where the money is going to come from. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this deal may make sense through the eyes of internationally focused lawyers and officials responding with utmost caution to the advice they are given. But on this side of the House, we believe fundamentally sovereignty is not something lightly surrendered, including to the United States of America, if I may say to the honourable gentleman for Clacton. I give way to my honourable friend.
What we do know about the financial deal is that it's inflation-linked. And it's inconceivable, therefore, the ministers won't have had that modelled. They will have a view about the likely increase in inflation and the total sum involved, and it will be astronomical, which is why they're trying to disguise it.
Friend is spot on. They know how much it's going to cost. They're just not being transparent with public money. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to speeches from honourable friends, my honourable friend on the front bench made an excellent point of order earlier when he raised the point that the minister had said, and it's their crucial argument that they are depending on, that the ITU could somehow threaten our spectrum at Diego Garcia. And yet, as my honourable friend for Lillian Whitford pointed out, in a written answer from the Telecoms Minister dated the 12th of February, he was very clear. The ITU cannot challenge the UK's use of civilian or military spectrum. Bang to rights. And Madam Deputy Speaker, but the most extraordinary point we have heard today from a galaxy of backbench speakers opposite. They've all stood up and said that somehow the opposition shouldn't be calling this debate. The Honourable Lady for Kilmarnock and Loudoun, the Honourable Gallant Gentleman for Leyton and Wanstead, and the Honourable Lady for North East Derbyshire all said that somehow we should be debating important issues like the buses and so on. And yet, the argument from ministers is that this is critical to national security. Well, if that's the case, surely we should be debating it in Parliament. And we're going to keep on debating it, Madam Deputy Speaker, until we finally get some answers. Now, my honourable friend for Tonbridge made an excellent point. He made an excellent point because I, along with the Shadow Foreign Secretary, recently had a wonderful and very moving meeting with many Chagosians up in one of the committee rooms. And they were clear to us they've had no meaningful consultation with the government and no face-to-face meetings. Absolutely shameful. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, and I quote, surrendering sovereignty... I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
I just want to make the point, though, earlier on, that the government's position throughout all of this has moved. First of all, we were told by them this was an absolute legal requirement under international law. Then when it was demonstrated that actually there was the get-out for the Commonwealth issues, they then moved to legal uncertainties. But there can be no legal uncertainties unless they waived their right to have the Commonwealth overrule the judgment and it becomes an advisory position. Doesn't that make you one understand that they simply don't seem to know what they're doing?
Well, my right honourable friend puts it brilliant. He put the question about the waiver and it was ignored. Like all the other questions we've asked, point-blank questions, repeatedly, UQs, oral questions, debates, they never answer any of the questions. So let me conclude. Surrendering sovereignty over the Chagos Islands would be an irresponsible act which would put our strategic interests and the interests of our closest allies in danger. Not my words, Madam Deputy Speaker, those of the former Labour Security Minister, Lord West. Or as Ed Arnold of Rusey put it so rightly on Monday, the Prime Minister should shelve his Chagos Islands deal. It is peripheral to the UK's current security challenges and the money could be better spent on defence. We agree 100% on this side of the House. We believe this deal is bad for our security and those of our closest ally, the United States. It undermines a military base that is strategically crucial, particularly in the face of the growing threat from China. But above all, this deal involves the unacceptable notion of paying billions to lease back land we currently own. So finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's time ministers told us the truth about how much this deal will cost and where the money will come from. They can't keep redacting when it comes to the cost of Chagos. This is public money, and the public have a right to know the truth.
I call the Minister, Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had some really interesting contributions during this debate. We've had some wild maths, which Carol Vorderman would have had a word or two to say about the maths. We've had some insulting comments from the member for Tonbridge, who was downright playing the man or the woman and not the ball earlier on in the debate. But, however, I will try to respond to some of the points raised, certainly those which my colleague, the Minister for International Development, didn't answer, and I think she did a pretty good job in opening this debate. And as the member, the gallant member for Leyton and Wanstead said, the Chagos Islands deal is paramount for our national security. The deal secures the joint UK-US base on Diego Garcia, and without it, the operation of the base is at risk. The deal, once finalised, will ensure the base can operate as it has done well into the next century. As members know, Diego Garcia is a joint UK-US base, and it's only right that the new US administration has the opportunity to review the agreement, as has been made, the point's been made on a number of occasions tonight. And we will continue to hold constructive discussions with the US on the deal. As the member for the North East Derbyshire said, the gallant, honourable and gallant member, we will only agree a deal that's in the UK's best interests and protects our national security. And she, of course, has lengthy experience in security and defence matters. Many colleagues have asked about the cost of the deal and whether payments have increased. And the claims being circulated in the media are categorically untrue. The overall cost of the deal has not changed from that negotiated under the former Mauritian Prime Minister. The initial political agreement signed in October was clear that the annual payment would be indexed. This position has not changed. This was a policy of the previous government, as the member for Braintree, who is no longer in his place, has said. This was a policy of the previous government and had long been agreed in writing with the previous Mauritian government. Once the treaty is signed, it will be laid in both houses for scrutiny in the usual way. This deal has not been rushed. In fact, it was a subject of several... In a minute, I'll just finish this point. And of course, the new government in the UK inherited a situation where the long-term future of the base was under threat. The previous government obviously agreed with this government, and rightly so, that there was a need to act. Otherwise, 2 years of negotiations would not have carried on. Successive Conservative Prime Ministers, Foreign and Defence Secretaries recognised this and gave the instructions to begin negotiations in 2022, holding 11 rounds before July 2024.
If the government is so confident that this deal offers excellent value for money and taxpayers are going to welcome it, why don't you just tell us how much you're going to pay them?
I think what this debate has shown is that some members are finding it difficult to come to deal with the fact that a treaty is between two sovereign governments, and that when a government is operating, it has the right to make negotiations in its own way, particularly with the sort of majority that was achieved last July. Of course, we have to have parliamentary debates and questions have to be asked. And as a shadow minister for As a shadow minister for...
Point of order, James
On a point of order, are there any rules whereby the amount of transparency from a government should be determined according to the size of its majority?
I think the member knows that isn't a matter for the chair. Let the minister continue.
That's the second point of order that was not really a point of order. But it is quite fun to be in opposition. But I think what we've seen in the last 24 hours is genuine leadership on defence matters, as opposed to some very high jinks from... Of course I will.
Will you tell us how much? Will the Minister agree with me that what is important is ensuring the security of the future of this base until the opposition puts forward a credible alternative? They should support the government who are fixing this issue.
I rest my case. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to...
Minister for giving way. Before she concludes her contribution, could she just put on record that this is really about the most grotesque injustice that was done to people under colonial subjection by this country in the 1980s, and since then they have fought for their right to return to their islands, and that should be central to our thoughts on this, to right the historic wrong that was done to the Chagosian people.
The honourable member, of course, has a long history in being active in the all-party group with the member for Romford, who's not in his place today but is in the shadow foreign team. And I think that goes to show that across this House, including the former member for Crawley, there's been a desire for a very long time to bring the true situation of the Chagosians to light. And I pay tribute to all members across this House who have fought for a very long time for the Chagosians to be treated properly. Because, as the member for Kilmarnock and Loudoun said earlier in the debate, in a very sensible contribution, as opposed to some of the other contributions this afternoon, that really we regret the way that the Chagosians were removed from the island, the way they were treated thereafter, and the negotiations were between two states, and our consistent priority in that of the previous government has been to protect the base, and we haven't necessarily always focused on the needs of those people. So I thank those members this afternoon who have brought forward the interests of the Chagosians, including some of the members from the Lib Dem benches as well. And the government will finance a new trust fund for the support of the Chagosian community. We'll also take forward visits to the archipelago, and for the first time Mauritius will be free to implement a program of resettlement to the islands other than Diego Garcia. And I know that that will also be of a positive development for the member for Manchester, where there is also a significant and active group of Chagosians who are very active in their faith community. I take an intervention from the member.
I have a lot of respect for the Honourable Lady, and that's why I'm going to have one more go at this. Is there any other court than the IOJ that could come to a judgment against Britain over the sovereignty of the islands?
As the member is aware, with his long-term intelligence background, really the lack of legal certainty is why we've acted, because the base cannot operate in practical terms as it should. That's bad for our national security and a gift to our adversaries if we fail to secure legal certainty for the base. Moving now to continue the point on the Chagosians, there are many different views within the Chagosian community, and one example, the Chagos refugee group, often represented by Olivier Bankou, one of the largest Chagosian groups, has actually welcomed the agreement. I now move to the environment question, and the MP for South East Cornwall mentioned the unique environment around the Chagos Islands, where, of course, the most important marine environments do need to be protected. And whilst security was paramount, we have also secured a deal that will help protect the unique environment of the Chagos archipelago. There will be an enhanced partnership between the UK and Mauritius, under which the UK will support Mauritius's ambitions to establish a marine protected area that protects the globally significant ecosystems in the Chagos archipelago.
I thank my honourable friend, the Minister, for giving way. Would she agree with me that it is somewhat unfortunate that after some consensus yesterday at Prime Minister's questions on matters of national security, we are now seeing, sadly, the opposition benches reverting to type which is flirting with populism on important issues.
I thank my honourable friend for this intervention to perhaps conclude our debate, looking at Madam Deputy Speaker, to say that...
I beg to move that the question now be put.
The question is that the question be now put. Does many of that opinion say aye? Aye! The contrary, no? No! I think the ayes have it. The question is as on the order paper. As many of their opinions say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! Division! Clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of contrary, no. No. And the tellers for the ayes are Sir Ashley Fox and James. Wow, I was going to say Wilding for a moment. And the tellers for the noes are Martin McCluskey and, remind me, Kate did. This is like so awful, but here we are. Thank you so much.
The ayes to the right, 147. The noes to the left, 298.
The ayes to the right, 147. The noes to the left, 298. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked.